Hello everyone and welcome to the second game of the semi-final match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. We've seen what happened in the game. In the first game, it was as close to perfection as a scramble chess game can get. So let's see what happens in the second one, where Magnus now has the white pieces, and let's see what happens. Can he go for the full point, or will we, as usual, have tie breaks? So Magnus with white opens with pawn to c4, and the prize for winning this match is to face the winner of the match, Hikaru Nakamura versus Vincent Keimer, the other semi-final match. So c4, the freestyle English, we have c5 by Fabi, and it makes sense. Look at that queen, the bishop, the other bishop. Of course, you want to open up these lines of attack and go after your opponent's king. We have c5, pawn to b3, pawn to b6, and pawn to d4, where Fabi could continue symmetrical with pawn to d5, but he decides for c captures on d4. It is definitely the best move. Queen captures, and now knight to e6. Sorry, not knight to f6, knight to e6, attacking the queen. Queen back to d2 and knight to f6. We have knight to e3 and rook to e8. Here, you can already feel the tension of this knight coming to f5 and then to e7, delivering a nice smothered mate. So rook to e8, just getting rid of any such ideas, because you could easily mess this up. Not, of course, Fabi, but if you played this in a blitz or bullet game, you'd probably go something like bishop b7, then we go knight f5, and you play bishop d6, guarding this pawn, and all of a sudden your opponent, let's say, sacrifices the queen. You have no idea what's happening, and then a nice knight e7 checkmate. So it can happen. So rook to e8, better have that rook there. We have bishop to b2. Magnus now preparing to put pressure on that g7 pawn. Bishop to b7. Pawn to f3, limiting the power of the queen-bishop battery on the light squares. And bishop to f4 now, pinning that knight. Fabi says, all right, that is a very, very impressive knight. I really do not want it to move there. So bishop f4 definitely makes sense. We have g3, bishop to h6. And knight 1 to g2. We have pawn to g6 and pawn to h4 by Magnus, trying to go after Fabi's king. And Fabi not in a pleasant position. For example, the engine gives the best idea for black knight h5, which isn't with the idea of capturing on g3. It's merely to give up the rook, get rid of the strong dark square bishop, and then once white defends, then you go for the attack, f5. And okay, you have the queen bishop battery, you have the knight here, the bishop nicely pinning the knight on e3. This knight may be able to come into the game, saying that is the best black can do. But Fabi goes for queen to b8, puts pressure on that g3 pawn, and Magnus advances it all the way to g3. Now, it seems like a good idea to bring your queen over to g3, but g5 just wins a piece, and you don't have any checkmating ideas here for black. So after g4, we have bishop back to g7, and pawn to h5. Magnus just continues pushing. If AlphaZero can do it, humans should be able to push the h pawn as well. Bishop to h6, and now look at this. Magnus decides to castle queenside. And it's a really a weird move, but also it makes sense. He wants to play bishop c2, play king b1, king to a1 most likely, and he wants to open up the h file. He will have pressure on that bishop on h6, so Fabi goes bishop g5, doesn't want the bishop to be a target on h6. Bishop to c2, making room for the king, and now knight to f4, offering a trade of knights. Magnus goes for it, Fabi captures with the queen, and knight to f1. Magnus just offers a queen trade, which Fabi goes for. Captures, we have pawn to e5, and Magnus unpins with king to b1. And it seems like the fireworks are over, but it only seems that way, because that is one of the reasons why we love chess. We have rook to e6, a very nice move by Fabi. Pawn to h6. Now, it doesn't do all that much, but it does restrict the movement of the black king. So Fabi says, all right, I'm just going to castle kingside, as I still haven't moved my king or rook. We have pawn to e4, pawn to d6, and now pawn to b4 by Magnus. As usual, the best move in any position. And he is preparing to play bishop to b3, put a bishop on this diagonal, and in a very convenient moment to execute pawn to c5, if it will be possible. Knight to d7, gaining more control over c5. King a1, we have rook to c8, and now bishop to b3, defending the pawn on c4. Rook to f6, putting pressure on f3, and now pawn to c5. And it seems like, okay, is this move a bit premature, or what is this? Can we just play b captures on c5? Well, Magnus wanted to play knight to c4, and there's really not a good way to deal with this. For example, pawn to d5, knight a5, the bishop here is a huge problem, and once the bishop moves, something like bishop captures, and if you capture, then rook captures on d5. It's very, very hard to find a good move for black. There's a lot of pressure on that e5 pawn, for example. If you win a pawn here, then the knight here hangs. It's just a very, very bad position for black. Yeah, too much stuff is hanging. So after c5, Fabi plays bishop to a6, and it's a very nice move. Fabi realizes that this is definitely a problem bishop, and that he should either trade it or move it out of the way. And Magnus says not so fast. Plays bishop to c4, and with twice Fabi's time, he puts Fabi in a most unfavorable position, because in order to survive this, Fabi has to do something no chess player has ever been able to do, and that is admit that your piece just doesn't belong there. And especially since you played it on the previous move, Fabi has to play bishop back to b7. But as we've discussed this many times, there is no way any chess player does this, plays a move and then brings the piece back. And the problem with capturing on c4 is similar to what we already discussed. The knight here is just too powerful. For example, b captures on c5, knight captures on d6, attacks the rook, and let's say rook to c6, knight back to c4. Now attacks the knight, puts more pressure on the d5 pawn. Once you move it, b5 attacks the rook, and once the rook moves, you're just gonna double up on the d file. You always have this pressure on the e file. It's just a terrible position for black. So here, instead, after bishop to c4, knight to b8 was played, and now Magnus advances the pawn to b5, and knight to b8 would work if Magnus didn't calculate all this out and put a pawn on h6, believe it or not. Now look at what happens here. Rook captures on c5. This is what Fabi figured, because if you go b7, just c6, and this will not do. So after b5, rook captures on c5, we have b captures on a6, bishop captures on d2, removing the defender of the bishop on c4, captures, and now look at what Magnus had in mind, bishop captures on e5. Of course, from this position, everyone, including your uncle, would find it, but Magnus found it, well, who knows at which point in the game Magnus found it. Now you cannot capture it due to rook d8 checkmate, so after bishop captures on e5, rook to e6 was played, and now bishop captures on d6. And here, knight captures on a6, and Magnus played bishop to b8. The best way is just to continue increasing tension with rook h to d1, but Magnus played bishop to b8, and he gave Fabi one opportunity to get back in the game. What would you play here as black, just for fun? If your life was hanging by a thread. The only defense for black is king to f8. King to f8, and now you cannot go after the a7 pawn. If you capture it, rook to c7 attacks the bishop, and you could defend with something like check, king e7 and rook e8, but now the rook comes to b7, stops bishop to b8, and it's black who's taking over the game. So after bishop to b8, Fabi played rook to e8. He does not find the best idea. So Magnus missed it a little bit with bishop b8. Fabi retaliates, or rather returns the favor with rook to e8, and now bishop captures on a7. Magnus again gets a winning position. b5, we have bishop to d4, preparing to remaneuver the bishop to f6. Knight to c7 and bishop to f6. We have knight to e6 and rook h to d1. Now, Fabi has to be very, very careful. The rook and knight do control that d8 square, but how are you going to play if all of your pieces are controlling the d8 square? We have rook to a4, preparing to double up on the a file to go after Magnus's a2 pawn. We have rook to d3, stopping ideas of b4 and b3, and pawn to g5. Now, this pawn to g5 isn't very impressive. It does stop f4 and further expansion, but it's also a target. We have rook 1 to d2, pawn to b4, and now king to b1, and rook 8 to e8. And here Magnus has a very clean way of ending the game, but he misses it, or rather, maybe he didn't miss it. He, of course, probably saw it and then decided that it wasn't necessary to overpush. But yeah, I'm sure you guys see it. Of course, the move is bishop captures on g5. It wasn't played, but yeah, again, you just win another pawn, and now you enjoy an extra 2 extra pawns endgame, because if knight captures, you again get checkmated, compliments of the pawn on h6. So after this rook 8 to e8 move, bishop to e7 was played, and now rook back to e8, bishop to f6, rook e to e8, Fabi hoping to get a draw, but Magnus says, as usual, no draw for bad friend. We have rook to b2, rook 4 to a6, and now rook d to b3. We have knight to f8, and now Magnus just grabbed the pawn, bishop captures on g5, and he was in this position on move 44 that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Next, the bishop is coming to d2, you're going to lose the b4 pawn as well, you're going to be down 3 pawns, and yes, you still have 2 rooks there, you can still make moves, but this would be, you know, playing against Magnus, this is this could only be considered an insult to continue playing. So yeah, Fabio resigns, Magnus wins the semi-final match, and he goes into the final, where he will face the winner of the Hikaru versus Vincent match. And I probably will show that game, so I'm not going to disclose the result. So yeah, stay tuned for that. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As usual, brilliantly played by both of them. They did make that one mistake each, but you know, what are you gonna do? They're not you know, young gentlemen anymore. They are, you know, people of age. And yeah, it was a brilliant also game 1, but as usual, Magnus takes down Fabi in time trouble. Fabi just cannot you know, sometimes Fabi manages to draw the classical and then goes into rapid and blitz against Magnus, but that also means, you know, have little time, and then Magnus will beat you, or Magnus will just grind you down, make you think, you know, you're going to have less time on the clock, and then he will, you know, beat you there. So Fabi does not make mistakes, it's just that the position, you know, no one can hold with so little time on the clock. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Aaron from Colleen, and I would like to thank Derek King, Charles Benjamin Flynn, Diane Schwartz, and Ilya Maltsev for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.